I call this meeting to order. This is the regular school board meeting of the Northfield Public Schools. It is Monday, July 14th at 7 p.m. Dr. Richardson, there were a few items in our table file.
Yes, we have several personnel items in terms of appointments, increases, decreases, and changes in assignment, as well as some resignations. We also have ratification of an employment action. And then we have the bid approval on the Greenville Park parking lot bid, as well as two agreements for first of all, for co-location of mental health services in a setting for special ed program. That's the Creek School program down in Faribault that we jointly run with Faribault, and also a purchase of service agreement for services for Birth to 3 facilitator in conjunction with the Faribault School District moving forward for this coming year.
Very good. If there's no objection, we will add these to the agenda as we move forward. All right. Public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the school district to address the board. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board? No? All right. We will move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet the minutes from the last school board meeting held on June 9th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? So moved. Moved by Ann.
Second.
Seconded by Julie. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. All right. Announcements and recognition.
Okay, we've got a couple this evening. First of all, just to let you know, we're continuing to do very, very well in terms of the work that our students are doing on advanced placement testing. We've got the results back from this year's advanced placement. We had 394 total exams taken by 245 students. And of those, we had 103 students making 5s, 142 tests with 4s, and 89 tests with 3s. So about 85% of our students scored either a 3, 4, 5 on the AP exams, again, which is about 20% higher than the state and nation. So again, a very positive thing, and obviously in at least a couple of areas, we had 100% of the kids that all scored above 3. So, and in fact, a couple places where they all scored 4s and 5s. So, very outstanding performance on the part of students, but also excellent work on the part of our teaching staff who are involved with teaching advanced placement classes for our students. Second piece would just be to announce to you that our Northfield Middle School has been named a National Promising Practice Award winner for 2014 by the Character Education Partnership for its transnational school partnership. Again, as you know, we've been working over the last couple of years, and Principal Jeff Peshta has been working in terms of creating a partner school relationship with the Race Secondary School in Maltrata, Veracruz, Mexico. And so they will be working over the course of this next year now in terms of email exchanges, photos, video conferencing, and opportunities for students and staff to share information back and forth. And you may remember in terms of Jeff's earlier presentation to you, the vast majority of our Latino students, their parents or they come from that particular region of Mexico, and so it's an opportunity for us to really build some promising bridges, and again, being recognized on the national level for putting that together. I'd also like to remind the community that filing for school board begins on Tuesday, July 29th, ends on August the 12th. There are 3 seats on the Northfield Board of Education that will be up for election on November 5th. Those are the seats of John Fossum, Carrie Nelson, and Julie Pritchard. And again, John is running for the attorney for Rice County, and so will not be running for school board this time around. And so as people are looking at that, knowing that we have 2 existing or board members, but we'll have one that will not be running again. Candidate for school board must be an eligible voter, be at least 21 years old upon assuming office, be a resident of the school district for 30 days before the general election, should not have any other affidavit on file for any other elected office during the same general election. And affidavits of candidacy are available in the district office, which will be open during that period of time, I believe, from 8 to 5 each day, right?
Well, not on the weekends.
Well, not on the weekends, yeah. During the regular work week.
And also, I may have made an error. Election day is November 4th. Did I say November?
Yes, because you said it was November 5th, and I listened to you and take everything you say as gospel. So I would never question you. Well, I just have to move election day. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. So it's Tuesday, November the 4th. Thank you. And so if people are interested in running, affidavits of candidacy, again, are available at the district office, and there is a filing fee of $2 that you must provide at the time you file for candidacy. And those are the announcements that I have this evening.
Dr. Richardson, can we introduce?
Yes, let us do that. And Matt, I know you would be very honored to make that introduction, so
Sure.
Please do.
We have our new Director of Technology Services, Kim Brisky, with us tonight. Just to introduce her to the board. Kim started a week ago, and I was on vacation, and 2 weeks ago now, she started, and I texted her to make sure she would come back for the second day. And so now we're on what day, Kim? 11 or 12? Something like that, yes. So we're very excited to have Kim with us. She brings a background in teaching Spanish. She taught Spanish for 8 years in Farmington. A little known fact, though, she actually student taught in this building here under the direction of Senora Hagan. And for the last couple of years, she's been working as a digital learning specialist with the Farmington schools. They're a little bit ahead of us, or further down the path with transformational technology. So Kim's been able to come in, roll up her sleeves, and get the folks moving right away. She's been an outstanding addition to our staff, and we wanted to formally welcome her at the board meeting here.
And also, little known fact, she is probably the person who has been the quickest to be recognized by Wayne Eddy with a 2-hour special, going back and looking at every nook and cranny of your life since you were born, I'm guessing. So Wayne already had sought her out and interviewed her, and she did an excellent job of presenting information about herself and her family.
And it's worth noting, Kim lives in Northfield. Her oldest child attends Greenville Park Elementary, and so already embedded within the community and making a difference right away. So welcome, Kim. Again.
Thank you.
Welcome. Other announcements or recognition? All right. We are ready to move on to our first item, which is the Elementary Art Professional Learning Community Presentation. And Mary, is this part 3? Is that what this is?
This is part
Yeah, the last chapter.
12. Right, Ann? Not do, it's 12, right? 12, thank you.
Yeah, you would know that.
Wait, I never get beyond part 2.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you again for your time this evening. We began our PLC presentation at the last board meeting, where we had a brief overview of the entire PLCs for our district, as well as the RTI coaches explaining the new phenomenon of joint PLCs at the elementary level, and Rose Turnipcliffe and Ellen Muhai explaining the English PLCs and the work they have done with common assessments and the writing rubrics they have developed. So this evening, we present the final chapter, chapter 4, and we have Kate Woodstrup with us, the elementary art specialist at Bridgewater. The elementary art specialist at Greenville Park is either in Montana or has been in Montana, and the elementary art specialist at Sibley will be new this fall. So Kate is representing the entire PLC. And she's going to explain to you the work the PLC, the 3 elementary art specialists have done during the PLC time, and then how she has taken that and applied it to her work at Bridgewater with her classes and her students. So thank you again for your time, and Kate Woodstrup will present and complete the PLC presentation for this year. Kate?
All right. Well, thank you, Mary Grace, and thank you to you, ladies and gentlemen of the school board. It's a privilege to be here and to speak about the work that I've been doing for really about 3 years now. So who we are. I'm figuring this out. Not working. How do I get? Okay.
And Kim just left, so.
Hang on.
Well, of
There's
course. What? Call the technology director.
You told me to hit the button. I hit the button.
Yep.
And we go step towards the mic.
There we go.
There we go.
Alright.
All right.
Yeah, I'm a little hard to hear
Yes,
sometimes.
so just, put the mic right up in your
I'll
face.
just-
It's
There
all
we
good.
go. All right. Well, this is an overview of who we are. So, we are the 3 elementary schools, Bridgewater, Greenville, and Sibley. We teach 6 different grade levels, and we each have a load of about 550 students. Next year, we're going to have a load closer to 600 students. And we teach our artists for 50 minutes once a week. So in the art room, we're not just a production-based class. So there's actually 4 main areas. So there's the studio art, production, and creation, which is the highest order on Bloom's revised taxonomy now. And it's very important, but we also incorporate art history, art appreciation, and an analysis of artists and their life and artwork. The arts teach a variety of lessons, not just production. So they teach life lessons about relationships between objects and things and people, as well as thinking outside of the box, thinking beyond a typical solution, having multiple perspectives to an item or solving a problem, and then also thinking through an idea, so the cognitive development. And this comes from the NAEA, National Art Educators Association, that talks about not just creating things, but thinking through that process of artistic development of an idea into production and then sharing. This is especially important because very soon most jobs are going to be arts related, and especially with new technology like iPads, it's all visual. And so allowing our students to early on have that mental habit of developing those cognitive ideas is going to prepare them for an arts related career later on. So here's our SMART goal. Our SMART goal has remained pretty much the same for the past 2 years. It's been tweaked slightly. Basically what we've done is we developed essential learnings from our curriculum, our district curriculum, which was based off of national and state standards. And we said that we wanted students kindergarten through 5th grade, we wanted 75% of them to demonstrate proficiency on these essential learnings. And we were going to measure this by using simple art assessments and rubrics. And we hope to reach that goal of 75% by May of 2014. So as we started attacking that SMART goal, we had 3 big questions. And that was, who are our students in that 25% that aren't meeting proficiency? Who are they? We're dealing with a volume of 550 kids in 6 different grade levels. So finding who they are. Then, what are they missing? What specific essential learnings aren't they able to grasp? And then, how can we go back into our curriculum and really improve how we teach it to make up that difference, to make up that gap? So we started with the district curriculum and we developed essential learnings. And here's a link to that curriculum from the website. And these come from national and state standards. Here's an example of the kindergarten curriculum for our district. And here's the 1st grade. So they get progressively larger and more pages as you increase in grade level. So we took this, which is a little difficult to read and a little difficult to pull apart and start planning curriculum, and we broke it down into these. So we simplified this, and then we standardized what we were teaching between the 3 elementary schools. So our projects might have been slightly different, but we were all teaching the same concepts. And we did this. This is kindergarten. Here's 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. And as you can tell, it gets, progressively more. So to measure these essential learnings, we developed rubrics, and those are getting passed around. we wanted to see what they were proficient at, and we wanted to use the project-based learning as data points to see where students were meeting those essential learnings. So this is my general kindergarten through second grade rubric that I use for their projects. And the beginning, intermediate, proficient, and advanced lines up with our report cards. And the topics here, cooperation and effort, that actually means, did they meet the objectives? Did they meet the essential learnings that I was trying to teach them? Creativity is, do they think outside the box to solving the problem? Craftsmanship and neatness focuses most on fine motor skill development, and then design and balance focuses with aesthetics. Are they thinking through a composition, where we place things in a work of art? This is general. I have taken some of these rubrics and I've tweaked them for certain projects to hit on specific essential learnings. Those are just what I use generally. And this is the 3 through 5 rubric, which is a little bit more complex, gets more into the fine motor skill development. So what I was able to do with these rubrics was I was able to take and use Skyward, which was a great technology for us. I taught concurrently here at the high school, and I had the opportunity to use Skyward as an electronic grade book, which added transparency to grading. It was really immediate. I could track students as they made progress, and I thought, what a great tool for elementary, for me to take those 550 and narrow it down to those students that I really need to, work more with one-on-one. So I was able to take that, use Skyward to narrow down that student population, and I did this in 2012, 13, and 13, 14. I found that I had 32 students, or 5% of 550, who were making no progress, remaining 2 to a 2 first and second semester on their report card, or making minimal progress, 2 to a 3 on their report card. I didn't see any regression from 3s to 2s the first year I did this. And it was really interesting how a lot of that pie chart here is actually first grade. Right there, 2 to 3. So we are making some progress here. I repeated the rubrics this year, 2013 to 14, and I had 25 students out of 550-ish that were making no progress, minimal progress. So we went from 5% to 4% this year, and my sampling was more spread out, which was really interesting, and it made me kind of question, okay, what's going on with these students? And I wanted to see if there was an overlap with special ed services. And then I could go directly and work with the special ed teachers and say, okay, what can I do? I see that there's a large population of ED kids in my sampling that are making little to no progress. How can we work together to come up with some teaching methods that I can help them feel more comfortable in my classroom and really get those essential learnings with them? So I found that some students overlapped in some categories. 10 out of those 25 students didn't receive services at all, and I was really proud that none of our ELs fell into that category. So I have an EL license in addition to my art license. I was very, very proud of that. It was very good. I also wanted to see if early art education had some impact on their development, and if that contributed to a gap in why they weren't making progress with their peers. So 16 out of 25 of those students from this past school year, 2013 to 14, 64% were half-day kindergartners. And that gap followed them from first grade to fifth grade. And they never were able to really pull up and decrease that gap. So I thought, as we have all-day kindergarten coming through next year, which I'm so pumped about, that is going to change. And I feel so good because now those students, I don't have to worry so much about that first grade year of catching up and then keeping my first graders who had me already for a year staying challenged. So that's going to be a really exciting change. So to help my students, I invited them to conferences, and I gave them one-on-one instruction. I had them right close to me so I could see where the pitfalls were, and I wanted to know and be there so I could guide them along the way. I also thought, if we can do book in a bag where we send a book home with first graders to read and practice reading, why can't I do art in a bag? So I took donated art supplies, put them in a bag, put a notebook and a packet of creativity and drawing exercises in there, and I sent them home. And the kids thought it was a gift. They didn't think it was extra practice or extra work. They were like, we get art supplies? Yes. And some of my kids don't have crayons at home. They don't. And that's a reality. And so if I can give them a packet of crayons and some paper and say, practice, they are so thrilled to be able to have that opportunity. So I answered my first question, which was, who are the students? Now I was trying to figure out what they were missing, and then what could I do about it? So we took the essential learning, and we deduced them further into key essential learning. And we agreed upon these key essential learnings as a PLC. We then created these trimester simple assessments, which are on the blue papers over there. And those are for all 6th grade levels at this point. And they were to assess these key essential learnings. And we got this idea from our fall of 2012 AEM conference. And the speaker told us, expect your students to do no better than 60%. Just expect that. If they fail, at least you know. Bad data is better than no data. And we don't have MCA scores, we don't have DIBELS, we don't have math that we can really use to figure out which essential learning they aren't getting. So unlike a classroom teacher, I kind of have to, start from the basics here. So here's how I took the 5th grade essential learnings that I showed you earlier, and I deduced them into the key essential learnings. And here they are spelled out for all 6th grade levels. Here's a simple assessment example from 1st grade. So I give the first assessment around November, so they have time. I don't want to test them right at the beginning of the year when they maybe haven't drawn anything for 3 months. And so they have a little bit, a little bit behind them. And then the second one happens around January, February. The last one happens in May. And these are production-based, but there's a little bit of art history, and you also are really working with the principles of art and the elements of design here. We work with space, color theory, line, texture. Here's the 3rd grade one. It's a little bit more complicated. It includes a lot more art history. It also works with line, shape, color theory, space, and balance. So to calculate the scores for these, what I did was I took each class for each assessment. I took the number of kids who took the assessment in the class, the number correct on each question, and then added that up and then got my percentage for each classroom. And then I took kindergarten group A plus kindergarten group B, and I got my percentage for grade level. So the first year I did this, I was expecting 60%. Our SMART goal was 75. So we thought, okay, by the end of the year, we'll get to 75. Well, the first year I did this, I found, here is the 75 SMART goal line. This is the first assessment. They're scoring 82%, then 97, and I think that's 90%, I can't really read it, 9% here, or 88%. That's what it says, 88. So they scored way above where I thought they would be. And that happened for kindergarten, 1st grade. 2nd grade dipped a little on their second assessment that first year. And then all the other grade levels performed beyond expectations. So I was really proud of the kids. And our SMART goal was 75%. So we're like, yay, we're coming very close to the SMART goal, and we're beating it, yay! And then I took the data and those topics, those essential learnings that I tested, and I looked and I saw which ones they were struggling with. So I went back into my curriculum for this 2013-14 school year, and I revamped it. And I said, okay, I need to target this skill. And I did. And this is what happened. So on our first assessment, 2012-13 is in red, 2013-14 is in green. We met or exceeded the previous year's expectations. I was like blown away. Like, oh my gosh, our artists are doing amazing. And our SMART goal is that line there that says 75%. Here's assessment 2. So where we had that 74%, or they were very close to that SMART goal, they jumped up to 91% on that assessment. Just by going back into the curriculum, finding exactly what I had to target, and making it better, making it more accessible to them. And here's the third assessment. So they're now scoring in the 90 percentiles on these assessments. So here's the areas that I found that I need to improve from last year for this year. And what's cool is some of the topics overlap with the grade level next. So it's going to be neat to go, hey, remember this? We're doing it again, because we need to make sure we get this essential learning down. So my next steps are pretty exciting, actually. So the NAEA, our National Art Educators Association, collaborated with a committee called the National Coalition of Core Art Standards, and they developed new next generation visual art standards. And these were released June 4th, and that's why I kind of wanted to wait till this meeting so I could talk more about them. And what's really great about these is they're not just production based. They're more about the cognitive and the philosophical ideas behind art making. So really the conceptualization of the ideas. And they're going to build those in a way that they're creating lifelong goals for artistic literacy. So skills beyond primary, secondary, and college, but in life. So, and that's our goal as artists. We really just want to take that education piece and bring it out into the world and connect and be educated about what's going on and be able to communicate and talk about it. So they're going to also define more about the artistic processes of making something, sharing it, responding, and connecting it with your life or someone else or the world. And the other really great part is they're going to standardize that through the 5 arts disciplines. So you have music, dance, visual arts, theater, and film. So those standards are going to be the same for all 5 areas. And the part I'm excited to get my fingers in is these model cornerstone assessments that are authentic strategies for measuring student learning and growth. So what they've done is they've come out with assessments for primary in grades 2 and 5. I've done it for all 6 areas. So I'm going to be taking what they have produced, and they're not really out yet, and I'm going to be comparing them to what we have in place, and then reevaluating our curriculum, reevaluating the essential learnings and the key essential learnings and those assessments to be more aligned with nationally what's going on. And it's neat how we're kind of this grassroots PLC, and we've been on the same level of development nationally. And I had ideas about that going on. I had heard it coming down the pipeline, but I was like, we're just going to do this over here on our own. And now to have nationally a whole coalition of art educators working towards this, it's really incredible. So thank you for allowing me to speak about my PLC and for your time and the ability to connect with my colleagues, which I wouldn't be able to do. We're in 3 separate buildings, and it's great to just share. Here are my sources in case you want to read more about what's coming from NAEA and some other great articles. And do you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me this evening?
Thank you, Kate.
That was a mouthful. I was like, I have 15 minutes.
Board members' questions? Anne?
This really excites me, and you have this enthusiasm for art and for your students that just comes through clearly. And I just want to thank you for showing us all these little samples. I'd love to see more, and I really like the philosophy you're using and making this so hands-on and fun and so important.
It is.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm trying. I'm definitely trying.
Other questions? Julie?
I have one question
Your
and
mic.
one comment. My comment, thank you for this fabulous presentation.
The mic.
Oh, awesome.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Anyway, thanks, Kate. You represented your PLC very well, and your packet was really informative and very well put together. And I love the way you talked about the profound way that the visual arts benefit our kids. I don't think you think of that, and I was really impressed by that. My question is, the 50 minutes once a week, is that the state standards that we're given for art that we need to educate our elementary schools?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
That's a little bit above me.
Okay.
But that's what we have done in our district.
Okay.
And that's pretty typical for primary.
I do not believe there is a minutes in terms of a state standard of minutes for art. There is a requirement that art is taught, but art can be taught by the classroom teacher. Art can be taught by an art specialist. And as you can imagine, across the state, there's a huge difference in terms of the level and quality of art programming that's in place because of the amount of time and whether they have somebody that is focused on instructing the art program or is trying to work it into the myriad of other things that they might be doing during a classroom day.
Okay, thank you. So thank you again, and I love the way you call them artists and not
They
students.
are. They're my artists.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? No?
I read where everyone's got creativity, but our culture seems to iron it all flat at an early age. Thank you for stimulating the kids to be able to continue that creativity and hopefully into an adulthood. Thank you.
No two of my art projects look exactly alike, and or my students make their art exactly alike, and I encourage that highly. You know, my sample project or my sample shouldn't look like their project. They should make their own choices, have their own ideas, because they are different people and they are different artists.
Other questions? I had one comment and one question. One comment was I was amazed that the amount of data and analysis that you put in, and I mean, it's just, it's fantastic, and it's lovely to think about it being applied to the visual arts. My question was, you mentioned that you were also using this as a strategy to go back to the teaching staff, and you particularly you talked about the special ed overlap. So what kind of strategies were you able to share with the teachers beyond your PLC?
Well, we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
Part of this putting together this presentation was finding out
Right.
Exactly where those things, those overlaps are. And so I've been always kind of in communication with our special ed department, and now it's going to be, okay, now I need to go to this teacher and say, this is what's going on, and what can I do to support these students more. So that's a goal of mine, is really to connect with staff inside my building, my colleagues, and just work more closely with them.
That's great, and it seems like the RTI coaches might be another source as you start to look at this too. But
I would love to be part of RTI.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was just a fantastic presentation. It made us all want to be in your art class.
Yeah. Come on down.
Yeah, come on down.
I teach,
Yeah,
what is it, like, I'll teach 9 to 3 or something like that. I'll have classes all day, every day. Come to kindergarten. Kindergarten gets up that.
Okay.
I love kindergarten.
I think one of the most powerful things in terms of what Kate has shared with you tonight is, you know, again, we've really focused so much because of federal law and because of state focus on reading and mathematics. And I think what Kate has shown you is the principles of professional learning communities. First of all, identifying what it is you want kids to know, and then identifying what are you going to do when they don't know it. And to have taken the time to really look at creating those essential skills for each grade level and taking that myriad of siloed little bitty print and breaking it down and saying, here are kind of the core things that we want every kindergartner to know, that we want every first grader to know. And then really thinking about, as students are demonstrating what they know, identifying those kids that aren't able to demonstrate what you want, and then saying, how am I going to instruct them differently so that I make sure that they can become proficient. And I think it's a real powerful story, and it's one that really reflects kind of the best of what we want PLCs to do and what we hope RTI will do, you know, when we're working with RTI, but what we really want all PLCs to be thinking about is doing those two pieces. So really appreciate it. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. And again, I think it would be an exciting place to be in your classroom.
And we take reading and math. We certainly do reading and math.
Sure.
We incorporate that into
Well, especially if you're having them identify a rhombus in kindergarten.
They always go like this or this. It's the same thing. It's the same word. And once they can get that symbolic knowledge, then they can start to put it together. And that's left brain, right brain research too. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Kate. All right, we are ready to move on to our next item, which is the presentation by ATS&R.
Okay, and now Mark gets to follow that, right?
Yeah, at least I'm like little kids up here. There's some neat show, but.
And again, this is Mark Hayes from ATS&R. And what we're going to be looking at tonight is really the initial pieces of the facilities presentation. And Mark is going to take you through a mere 84 slides.
That's right.
Because I think that includes the thank you slide at the end, doesn't it? I think.
And that'll
But
go on.
but it's the concept of really beginning to take a hard look at what's going on in each of our facilities. What's the basic information about that facility? What are the educational needs that should be addressed in each facility? What are the deferred maintenance needs that need to be addressed in each facility? And thinking about combining that with the information that we received previously from Hazel about what do we see as the trend lines in terms of population of students in each building and how that's going to impact our ability to meet kids' needs and the capacity of the buildings. So that'll take us kind of those first really important steps. And then our hope is, and we'll talk about this when Mark gets done, is then how to take the next step of saying, once you kind of know what all the pieces are, what are the ballpark costs for doing those kinds of things? And how do we begin to think about priorities for getting them addressed? So Mark, it's all yours, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Richardson, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. So as Dr. Richardson said, I'm here to present some of the initial findings of our district-wide facilities master plan. We have been working on it for months, so excited to be here to share some of that information with you. A little bit of information about who we are, ATS&R Architects, Engineers, also known as Armstrong, Torseths, Golden Dean. Maybe if you've been around long enough to remember that name. But we are school specialists. As Dr. Richardson said, I'm with ATS&R. I'm an architect. I'm a partner in the firm. I've been with them for 25 years. As a firm, we've got 70 years as school specialists. I see there's a duplicate there. But anyway, 70 years, so we've been around since 1944. And 98% of the work that we do is schools. It's K-12 educational schools. Something weird is happening.
It stuttered. It stuttered several
it's
times.
slides. But anyway, you guys have the handout in front of you as well. Because I don't think this was on my slide initially. But anyway, in terms of
We just want to see if it's going to throw you.
Yeah. But in terms of the firm, you know, it's one location in Minneapolis with all the disciplines. So it's not just architects, but it's mechanical, electrical engineers, interior designers, technology, people that work on voice, data, video, security, sound type systems, food service. Excellent, thank you. And as well as pre-referendum planning and facility master planning. We also are involved nationally, even internationally in education. So we're involved in a lot of the organizations like CFPI, which stands for the Council of Educational Facility Planners. Actually, 2 years ago, we were invited, we submitted a proposal to the National Convention. We presented a concept for the classroom of 2021, which they accepted. We presented that. Last year, we presented another concept, how you can incorporate 21st century learning principles into existing classrooms. You know, it's not all just about new schools. So, you know, I guess a lot of involvement with education throughout the country, and recognized presenters, authors, to some of the publications like Learning by Design, American School University, etc. So a lot of experience in the design of educational facilities. So, you know, $2 billion of construction in the last 10 years, numerous facility and long-range plans, as well as numerous additions, alterations, etc. A couple things. We did just design the I.G. Holden Intermediate STEAM School down in Austin. That did receive an award, a Citation of Excellence Award, which they don't just give out to anybody. We're very proud of that. By Learning by Design just this spring. And same with Lourdes High School, the new high school in Rochester received an Outstanding Project Award. But, you know, basically, you know, what that is, I mean, the way that serves you is that we have an idea of what's out there in education. We really try to serve as a resource to your school district and our clients. So with that little marketing blurb being said, I want to get on to your district-wide facilities master plan. So really the first step is getting a really good understanding of your needs and your facilities. And what we've really been doing over these last few months is tackling those top 2 items, is really where we are today. So it's identify your facility condition with this facility assessment study that we did that understands the physical condition of your buildings, as well as identifying some of your deferred maintenance needs. And then examine your current facility utilization, meaning we have a really good understanding of how all the spaces are being used, a good idea of how your master schedules work, how your students are being taught, and taking that information, that helps us to get a good understanding of what we believe the capacity of your buildings is. Then some of the next steps is identifying some of those needs, incorporating your program accommodation and educational adequacy needs into a long-range plan, a master plan, looking at how that impacts or how the enrollment projections, the demographics impact those capacities, developing some priorities, and then finally, you know, creating some options to incorporate it into a long-range plan. So regarding your facility conditions assessment, the deferred maintenance items, what we did is we came out quite a few months ago, met with the building principals, met with heads of maintenance. Before we did that, we also met with Mr. Bell, Mr. Hillman, and then we walked the facilities with our mechanical, electrical engineers, our technology security people, architects, again, to just get a really good understanding of the physical condition of your buildings. You also have other consultants that have done other studies that do roofing assessments, exterior envelope, tuck pointing, exterior doors, windows, things like that. Paving. So you also have those studies that we've taken and incorporated into our physical building assessment study. We're working with Mr. Bell, et cetera, to prioritize those needs. So we'll come back to you as the plan, potentially next meeting, with a better understanding of all these physical needs, with a potential prioritization of maybe kind of the needs. And this is just some guidelines as to what we look at when we're looking at the priorities for the physical condition, where it says guiding principles. It's making sure that we maintain spaces where students can learn, of course, looking at the safety and security of the students and staff and community, looking at indoor air quality, comfort of occupants, and certainly protecting the taxpayer investment. So making sure that that building is maintained so that it continues to operate for many, many years. Other things that we will look at in terms of priorities Is there certain items that might need immediate attention? That might be a priority one. You know, certain things that might not be needed for maybe out for 10 years. Maybe those might be considered less of a priority. And then lastly, energy efficiency priorities. You know, there may be some strategies about if there's energy efficiency things that can be incorporated into your facilities. If you get a payback in 1 to 5 years, okay, maybe that's a priority one, etc. So that's what we'll be working on and sharing with you in more detail at an upcoming meeting. In terms of the facility utilization, educational adequacy, which I'll be sharing with you tonight, again, sat down, met with the principals, understand how all the spaces are being used, identify basically some of the deficiencies in the building, comparing some of your spaces to some standards, Minnesota Department of Ed standards, etc. As I mentioned, working with that to develop some capacities for your buildings and eventually creating some program standards and seeing how this all rolls into your enrollment projections and demographics. So with that, I'm going to start to share with you some of the studies that we've been doing. So first of all, we just want to get a good understanding of your building and your site. So here's an example of Bridgewater Elementary. That's the site plan. We just start to understand the boundaries. That white dotted line indicates the property line. Starting to understand the site circulation and just where some of your main entrances are. The red star typically identifies the main entry. Blue star is subsequent secondary entries. But then also understanding the site, about 9.5 acres. There are some Department of Ed guidelines that might suggest an elementary of this size, you know, maybe should be 15 to 20 acres. It's just a guideline. I mean, there's urban sites too that have much smaller acreage. In terms of the building, we know it's 84,000 square feet. Right now there's about 564 students. And so that breaks down to about 149 students per square feet. Again, it's just kind of guidelines that we look at to give us an understanding of your building. MDE guidelines suggest that for a elementary school of about 564 students, you know, you might be in the range of 110 to 135 square feet per student. So again, just another item that we look at. You know, you might think, well, okay, Bridgewater seems like you have more than the guideline, 149. Maybe it's because of some of the spaces, the commons, and some of those nicer spaces that you have in the building. That's probably why it's a little bit higher. Built in 1998, so relatively new building, no additions. Then we start to look at how all the spaces are being utilized. There's a legend on the lower left side. First, we start to look at just general classrooms. Those are in the kind of the light beige, and then the kindergarten rooms, which are kind of the darker brown. So you can just see that a lot of the building is being used by general classrooms, but then you can see there's a lot of the building that's used by other things. But and then you can see where we indicate first grade, second grade, third, fourth, fifth, etc. Pretty much a 4-section elementary school with four classrooms per grade. Then we start to look at some of the other spaces, how it's being used. So, and you guys have that legend, but the yellow indicates Phi-Ed spaces. The kind of the fuchsia color, if you will, is media center. The red is the office staff type spaces. Music is green, etc., etc. And then you can start to see there's a lot of the specialized spaces, a lot of the special needs type spaces that tend to fill in throughout the building. A lot of times these are some programs that weren't necessarily around when the building was originally designed. And so some of those spaces start to work themselves into areas that might have been designed as storage or staff areas and things like that. So I'm not going to get into too much detail on how every space in the building is being used, but you do have that in front of you. Then, you know, in discussions with the principals and walking through the buildings, we started to identify that bubble in the upper left says needs, program accommodation, educational adequacy needs. So we start to identify those, and this is how we do it, just by these bubbles. So starting, you know, at the lower right, controlled entry. Oh, I'm sorry. Security, you know, is important, and you know, Bridgewater right now does have a lock next to your door. It's got a video phone where they can buzz people in. But I think ideally there might be more of a controlled entry where people can come right into the office like you've done over at, say, Sibley Elementary School. I call that more of a controlled entry. The gymnasium space is good. It's just that this is more of a high school issue, really, I think, is that the high school is sharing space at Bridgewater to accommodate some of their athletic needs. And you know what I meant to say at the very beginning is walking through all your facilities, I believe, are very sound and in very good condition. I mean, I've done lots of studies, I've been through lots of buildings, and I'm not just saying this, but when I walked your buildings, there really was not that much in terms of deferred maintenance and things like that, needs that we came up with. So I guess I just wanted to give that kudos to Mr. Bell and Mr. Hillman, whoever else has, and the whole board, I guess, has some control on that topic. But anyway, then moving around to the left, there's the need for an ESL classroom. The comment that there's some band storage in the hallway sometimes, and the idea that there's many rooms that are small that again weren't necessarily designed for some of these special needs programs. The Read 180, the Title I, which there's 3 of them, some special ed, the math core, reading core, DHH, etc. They're losing, right now you've got a half-day kindergarten. With all-day kindergarten, you're going to lose a Title I room, so that'll need to find a space next year, and maybe they've already figured out where that's going next year. And then lastly, just the comment that the kindergartens would be smaller than typical Minnesota Department of Ed guidelines. They're more like regular-sized classrooms, and I'll share a little bit more information on that a little bit later. In terms of the facility assessment or the deferred maintenance needs, so again, I mentioned we get into this in more detail next time, but just big picture things. I wanted to share with you, the roof will be in need of replacement fairly soon, which is a fairly expensive item. Providing appropriate ventilation to some of those smaller spaces that I mentioned that maybe weren't originally designed as teaching spaces. And then just some opportunities to create some energy efficiencies and reduce maintenance costs and things like that in terms of upgrades to some mechanical controls and electrical things like occupancy sensors connected to lighting and potentially mechanical systems, etc. So that's just to highlight a few things. Site-wise, we look at the site as well, look at the site circulation. The big thing at Bridgewater tends to be how all the parents line up towards the end of the day to pick up their students. We do not quite have appropriate width right here where there's supposed to be two-way traffic. You get parents blocking access, and so there's really some congestion issues at the entry to Bridgewater is really kind of basically the issue there. Cars tend to back up on Jefferson Parkway where there's really not room for it, creating congestion, etc. Greenvale Park, 21 acres, about 67,000 square feet, 478 students approximately currently, so about 140 square feet per student, compared to guidelines of 110 to 135, so it's in the range. That's good. One building built in 1970, no additions that I know of, other than maybe a metal storage building. Again, 4-section building, 24 classrooms, K through 5, starting to indicate just where the general classrooms are and where the kindergarten rooms are, and how the other spaces are being used. Maybe I won't spend the time to go over that in detail. I know that you can see they've got 2 music rooms. I know there was some remodeling that occurred recently to create that band orchestra room, to create the art room that you must be using.
Nope, I'm Bridgewater.
Oh, you're just at Bridgewater, sorry. Okay. I understand as well that, I know the kindergarten rooms, now that you've got all-day kindergarten, we've got the 4 kindergarten rooms kind of to the lower left, whereas I know at one point they were more out front, and they got relocated. So some of the program accommodation or educational adequacy type needs that were identified was, again, controlled entry, trying to create a secure entry to to maybe route people through a main office before they get into the building, and I believe that's why the kindergarten rooms were moved. To the left there was a concern about those kindergarten rooms being right at the front of the building. I know that there's a third grade classroom right there. Right now, at least this last school year, was an EL or ABE, and now it's going to be a third grade classroom. So again, that's being displaced someplace. The acknowledgement that, again, smaller kindergarten rooms, more typical classroom size. The comment that it's a very compact building, and therefore you've got the comment about natural light. Not a whole lot of natural light because I think the depth of this space with the distance between exterior windows, and just the idea that because of the open classrooms, another security concern may be the lack of ability to really secure those classrooms in like a lockdown type situation because they are open. There is exiting that happens through the classrooms to get through some of the exterior doors, but I'm not sure that's as big of a deal. It's kind of been going on ever since the building was built, basically. Some storage needed because there currently is that outside freestanding storage building, and then the idea that, again, high school shares some of the FIAD space for their dance. And I guess lastly, again, there used to be a smart gym here that will be displaced by DCD next year. So either the smart gym goes away or they find another place for it. Needs in terms of the facility assessment or deferred maintenance. Here, just big picture, mostly mechanical upgrades. There's some parts of the building that are steam. It'd be maybe prudent to convert the building to hot water. There's a number of aging air handling units throughout the building that would be recommended to be replaced in the near future. And the same topic of upgrading controls, maybe some energy efficiency upgrades in terms of electrical, occupancy sensors, etc. And then site-wise, I would say, maybe not a whole lot. There was a concern about how the how the students are being dropped off, and I know that is currently in the process where they're moving the buses to the east. I just know that Mr. Bell has kind of got that in the works as we speak to alleviate some of those issues.
It will be done by fall.
Okay, that'll be done. Thank you. That's in the works. Sibley Elementary. This is the site. Main entry to the north. 21 acres again, about 76,000 square feet. A little bit more kind of in the range of the MDE guidelines of 131 students per square foot. Oh, yeah, I think the interesting thing here, different from your other two buildings, is that you can see this building was built originally, I believe, in 1962. They added on to it in 76, in 1990, in 2003, and 2010. So lots of additions to this building, not your other elementaries, which I think I'll be able to show in a little bit, that really starts to stress some of those core spaces. They didn't make the media center or the cafeteria or some of those spaces larger when they kept adding classrooms. And I think you can kind of see that graphically with this image. And then I think that also reflects on, like I said, that you're kind of more in the typical range of number of students per square foot with this facility. Again, just understanding the general classrooms and the kindergarten rooms, all the other spaces that are used throughout the building. You have the media center there. A lot of the media centers, at least the other two elementaries, have a computer lab near or within the media center. Here, I think because there wasn't space, they've taken up other rooms for computer labs. Also, one thing to point out, it happens to be the one elementary that has one music room. The other two elementaries had two, a band and a music room. From the educational adequacy standpoint, again, I think it comes down to some of the same comments about there's some of the spaces that weren't originally planned for the building that they're now trying to fit in some of these spaces. So the ESL is small. Some of the speech spaces are small for the number of staff and students they're trying to fit in them. You know, the RTI, math core, etc. are small. They're breaking out. They're maybe meeting in the hallways and things like that. Again, high school is sharing some of the space for basketball. Some rehearsal and storage space is needed in the music area. Again, maybe because there's the one music room and not two like others have. And some of the kindergarten rooms are small. I would say it looks like one is a little bit larger than the other three. The other three get more general classroom sizes. Similar comment in terms of mechanical upgrades, needing to look at replacing some mechanical units, some control and electrical upgrades might be recommended. From the site standpoint, I honestly don't remember a whole lot of issues from the site standpoint. I think this is just more of an understanding of how parents drop off and pick up their students in morning and afternoon, etc. So when I talked about educational adequacy, I was saying that things like, oh, maybe your kindergarten rooms are small. And some of the core spaces might be small. So this is an example of what we look at when we look at the appropriate size spaces for an elementary school, whether it be kindergarten rooms. Again, Department of Ed guidelines and kind of best practices would say that kindergarten rooms should be around 1,200 to 1,500 square feet. Classrooms around 900 to 950 square feet, et cetera, et cetera. So then what we did is we did look at the size of all your kindergarten rooms. And this is an example. So I've got this horizontal line that's right at about 1,200, which is maybe kind of the minimum size based on the recommended standards, if you will. And you can really just see that they're really general classroom sizes. So they're a little under 900 square feet when it might be suggested that they should be more around 1,200 square feet. Now, and then this is just a graphic that shows the bar of 1,200 and where they're all, down a little bit lower in about the 900 square foot range. Classrooms, we looked at all your classrooms, and I was very surprised to see that you really have nice sized classrooms. Again, we've looked at lots of districts, and there's lots of older buildings that have classrooms that are, 750, 800 square feet. Basically all your classrooms are right around 900 square feet. I mean, yeah, you've got some that are a little bit smaller, but that's just like maybe a room's 1 square foot narrower than another to make up 30 square feet. So again, just I guess pleasantly surprised to see that I would say all your classrooms at all your elementaries are nice, appropriately sized classrooms. A couple other things, again, we looked at, I mentioned music and band rooms. So again, somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 square feet would be recommended. And this was really more to show that, yes, you've got, I would say, appropriately sized music rooms. It was really just the acknowledgement that Sibley just had the one, whereas the other elementaries have two. I'm looking at media centers. Again, you can see Bridgewater, Greenville Park, fairly decent sized media centers. I commented before about Sibley, a bit on the smaller side. Again, that's the one where, they've continued to add students, but really haven't been able to increase the core spaces. And then lastly, cafeterias. I guess somewhat of a similar comment. It's a little bit complicated because it depends on how they're serving lunch, how many periods, how many students. But I would say in the range of 2,400 to 3,200 would be appropriate. So I think, again, Bridgewater, Greenville Park are close. And Sibley is just a little teeny bit on the smaller side. So I guess I just wanted to share with you that this is something we've done at your buildings. We've looked at the square footage of almost all your spaces just to give us a good idea, of what we call the educational adequacy of your spaces and how they're being used. And then we come to some of the other district spaces, the Longfellow Early Childhood ALC building. We know it's about 53,000 square feet, built in 41 with an addition in 62. I'm understanding how the first or the lower level is being used for the early ventures, early childhood, the infant, toddler spaces, etc. There's a bunch of mechanical spaces, some adaptive PE down there. Second floor, main level, if you will, the gymnasium. Again, some of the early ventures, some staff spaces, and the early childhood special ed is the blue spaces off to the right. And then lastly, the upper level, which is basically the ALC, and just how it's being used in terms of social studies, business, math, science, etc. We did talk to the director of the ALC about their schedule. I understand it's a 5-period day, and what this just means, where you see the number in the classroom, that would show how many periods it's available a day. So if it's a 5-period day, those rooms are being used, 4 out of 5 periods. Maybe science, English, and art might be, you can see they're maybe being used 2 out of the 5 periods. I'm sorry, I think I've got that backwards. If it's a 2, did I say that? Okay, I know that, sorry. If it's a 1, that means it's available. If it's a 1, it's used 4 out of 5 periods. If it's a 2, it's being used 3 out of 5 periods. Okay? And if it's a 3, it's being used 2 out of 5 periods a day. Not uncommon for some of the special spaces to not be utilized as much as general classrooms. In terms of some of their needs, really their main comment was just, the lack of space. They feel like their program could be increased if they had more space. There's a need, in the district for these programs, and more space might be beneficial. And then the idea too, where it says locate all district ECFE and ABE programs in one facility, might create some efficiencies if that were the case. Other than that, there are some issues on the lower level where there's an office that's up some steps that's not ADA accessible, Americans with Disability Act. Some toilet rooms that are pretty small downstairs that really aren't ADA accessible. Although you do have an elevator that gets you access to, ADA appropriate toilet facilities. Similar comments on the upper level about kind of restricting programs, and it'd be nice to be in one facility, and really no issues at the ALC level. In terms of deferred maintenance issues, I think we're looking at potentially some exterior window and door replacement and kind of some of the same mechanical control, electrical suggestions. Site-wise, the comment about a little bit lacking in parking, a little bit more parking would be nice, and then also in terms of site circulation and bus traffic, it might be a benefit to try to create access and a bus drop-off kind of on the back side where those 2 stars are. That was some of the items we identified. And then the last district facility other than the middle school, high school is that lease space over at the Northfield Community Resource Center. So this is the kind of the community education, recreation, ECFE space. Hard to tell, but when you walk in the front door, the red space is kind of all the main office, staff type spaces. And then the brown spaces to the left are all the ECFE type activities. And then upstairs, I think this is in a different building actually, is some of these adult basic ed type spaces.
It's a different section of the building.
Right. In terms of needs, again, I think they thought their space was working well. Just the comment about maybe it'd be a benefit if some of these functions were located adjacent to some of the other similar functions that are over at at Longfellow. Then we get to the middle school. Hope you're all staying awake. Middle school, it's a new building, only 10 years old, so a 61-acre site, larger than the kind of recommended guidelines, but they are just guidelines, about 208,000 square feet, about 950 students approximately, so about 219 square feet per student, some nice spaces in there, a little bit above the Department of Ed guidelines. But then we understand your site, the circulation, some of the exterior play fields, etc. And just another more close-up view of the building and the parking and the drop-off, etc. Again, an understanding of just general classrooms. So these are just kind of your general classrooms, math, English, social studies, etc. Again, understanding entries and secondary entries, elevators, the red dot that you've been seeing. So that's your main level. Second floor, general classrooms. And then you start to see the other classrooms throughout the building. The green to the left is science. As we indicated, Fayette is the yellow to the bottom. Auditorium in the center. Cafeteria is that light lavender purple color. Main office, staff areas in red. And you can start to see there are some other staff areas distributed somewhat around the building. And I do understand that, again, some of these, what used to be staff areas, kind of staff planning areas, again, have been converted to other special needs type functions. And that's the upper level. I think it's the industrial tech. Some of the industrial tech rooms are these gray rooms right here on the right, upper right. Upstairs is where you get some of the fax classrooms are upstairs. You do have some of these breakout areas that I identified adjacent to locker commons. So it's kind of some of these flexible spaces where students, can theoretically break out and work in small groups and things like that, and still be maybe passively supervised by adjacent staff in the classrooms. And then you start to see some of these other red staff areas throughout the building. Just a couple comments about the middle school, some of the deficiencies, if you will. The one comment was because it is kind of broken down into grade levels, 7th grade being lower level to the left here, 6th grade being over here on 1st and 2nd floor, 8th grade being upper left. It would have been nice to have a science classroom in the 6th grade houses, if you will. And then also that the cafeteria just seems like it's a little tight, designed a little bit, seems like a little bit small. And the same comment about it'd be nice to have a science classroom in the 6th grade wing. Facility needs, deferred maintenance needs, if you will. At some point, we're going to need a new roof on that whole building. So that's somewhat on the radar. And then just a few things in terms of some of the mechanical, control, electrical, kind of suggested efficiencies. Site issue, again, similar to what we saw at the, it was Bridgewater Elementary, where it just, a lot of parents are now there at the end of the day waiting to pick up their student. So just always lots of districts, lots of buildings tends to be circulation issues relative to that. But again, similar deal where you get parents lined up waiting to pick up their student, not really designed for three-way traffic, just difficult to get by. And then you start to get some backups on that main road. Northfield High School, overall site plan of Northfield High School, 36 acres, about 265,000 square feet, 1,236 students approximately. Again, another building that's been added on to over the years. This is a picture of the overall site with the high school to the right and then the middle school down to the left. But in terms of the building, again, an understanding of additions in the original building. So the original building was this somewhat T-shape in the center, built in 1964, so about 50 years old. Most of the building's about 50 years old. And then subsequent additions that have connected the wings, 1970 to the upper left, 1997 upper right, the auditorium cafeteria addition in 2002 to the lower left. And I guess I do think there was another addition down there of that girls' locker room on lower right. So again, an older building, most of it, like I said, 50 years old, that's been added on to. This is an understanding of your general classrooms. all the other spaces throughout the building. Phy Ed, Industrial Tech, the gray over here, Science somewhat in the center. And then even more, a lot of the red indicating some of the staff areas. Again, I think this is an example similar to the middle school, I believe, where they were designed with staff planning areas where you wouldn't really have classroom ownership. But I think now they really do tend to have classroom ownership in both buildings, and maybe partly because not necessarily the need to utilize the staff planning areas because of the student numbers, and also for the need for some of these other spaces that were staff planning to be utilized for other kind of the special needs activities. In terms of some of the educational adequacy or program accommodation needs, just some general overall storage needs. Upper left here, it talks about some FFE records, Phy Ed athletic storage, some accessibility issues in terms of ADA handicap accessibility. In that you've got this upper level mezzanine for all the practice rooms. There's no way for a handicapped person to get up there. It's just stairs. Even to get to the music suite, you have to cut across. You have to cut across this room that's kind of the dance studio, batting cage. You have to cut across there to get to the music suite. This is pretty minor. The refurbished pool, which is now those Phy Ed spaces, those aren't handicap accessible, but it'd be very simple to add a lift. It looks like it was almost designed to add a lift in there, handicap lift to get handicap accessibility into that. The orchestra room shares space with choir, very small. All the orchestra equipment is stored within the room. Ideally, maybe another orchestra room with some orchestra storage would be beneficial. The locker rooms, walking through the locker rooms, if you've been down there, very difficult to supervise. Tall lockers, Anyway, difficult to supervise. There's a need for additional athletic lockers. Some of the spaces, like the lavatories, the showers, are not handicap accessible, not ADA compliant. There seems to be the need for some additional, just general Phy Ed space. There's a lot of spaces in the building, but Phy Ed spaces, but they're kind of specialized. There's weight rooms, there's wrestling room, there's that upper level fitness room, but just not. There's only really the two kind of general Phy Ed teaching spaces. So ideally, there'd be some additional Phy Ed, just general Phy Ed spaces, which again I think explains why, at least from an athletic standpoint, they're using all these spaces at all the elementary schools for the basketball, for the dance, et cetera, et cetera. They're going other places to serve those needs. The main entry, again, you don't have a controlled entry at the high school. The cafeteria, kitchen, even though there's been an addition to the cafeteria, those spaces are tight. And then I commented about the underutilized staff areas, that again, they're really not used very well. Some of the spaces are being taken over for special needs. Similarly, at the district office, there's not really a controlled entry at the district office. Yeah, you've got the security camera with the push button. Ideally, there might be more of a controlled entry. Need for a chemistry lab. And then the comment that there are some congestion areas throughout the building. Oh, and maybe lastly, the Rock House. You'll see it on another slide, but the spaces in the Rock House are not necessarily ADA compliant either. From a deferred maintenance standpoint, plans, long-range plan for some work to the exterior wall, exterior window and door replacements, to replace certain roofs, just a few roofs in the building, and then again some mechanical upgrades in terms of air handling unit replacement. adding ventilation to certain spaces that maybe are used for some other function than they were designed for, and the same mechanical control recommendations. From a site standpoint, visitor parking right out front. Ideally, there'd be some additional parking spaces there. In the acknowledgement, there's a bit of a congestion right here when the buses are leaving and students are trying to exit the student parking lot. I did comment that it's short duration, so even though it's an issue, it didn't really seem to be that bad. You know, some of the overall site circulation concerns about trying to take a left-hand turn out of the main parking lot is difficult at times. There's some also congestion down at that southwest intersection. A couple drainage issues on the site. The Rock House, it was brought up a few times at the Rock House. It's kind of an issue in terms of the time it takes for students to travel from the Rock House to the high school. Maybe a little bit of security and transportation time issues, plus the ADA comment that I mentioned. And then I guess kind of one of the bigger things about this site was kind of the lack of field space. You're losing some of your field space because there's an overlay here of some of the softball and I believe soccer fields. You've added boys and girls lacrosse programs, and so there's a lack of space for that. Sorry. So I know that, what's it say? Lack of field space, teams practice off-site. So lacrosse practice off-site. Because of the main stadium, they can't play their games in the main stadium. They play their lacrosse games, I believe, on the center field, which really doesn't, not necessarily appropriate spectator space, people sitting in chairs on the side where maybe they might be offered the same sort of experience that other teams are offered, if they were to play in the stadium, as an example. So I think those are some of the bigger picture items at the high school. And then lastly, again, these are some of the guidelines that we look at in terms of appropriately sized spaces for middle schools, for high schools. You have that information. But then also wanted to share with you our understanding of your master's schedule. So again, we received your master's schedule, we analyze it, and we really understand how all the spaces throughout the building are being used in terms of, again, if it's a 7-period day, how often are those spaces being used? So again, this is starting to show your teaching spaces and their utilization. So if it has a 1, that means that it's used 6 out of 7 periods. So a lot of the general classrooms, math, English, social studies, etc., those tend to be pretty highly used. You can see we've got science to the left. There's a 0 over there at that science room in the corner, so that's used every period of the day, heavily utilized. General classrooms in the 6th grade off to the right, they're all used 6 out of 7 periods a day. It's not uncommon to see some of the higher numbers in some of the specialized areas, like right here, it's the industrial tech, that in this case, again, this is all based on semester 2, 3rd quarter of the last school year. So programs change and things like that, but this is a snapshot of how it's being used. But it helps us, if we start to see a bunch of, maybe 2s or 3s in your general classrooms, it starts to say that, boy, it seems like you got, a lot of extra space here, We're not really seeing that. And again, not uncommon for some of the specialized spaces to have higher numbers. You get down into the music suite here, you have 4 music rooms down there. Again, if you remember the high school, we'll get to that in a minute, but I think there's maybe two music spaces where they've got 4 here, and you can see these are being used 3 out of 7 periods, or the one up here is being used maybe just 1 out of 7 periods. And then FIAD gets a little bit trickier, but you've got about 17 sections of FIAD distributed among your FIAD spaces. And then the upper level, and this is where I show that 8th grade house to the left and the 6th grade to the right. And again, a little more good utilization of your general classrooms. And then this is fax upstairs, just not quite as utilized, which is not uncommon. Art is there, these 2 art rooms in the center. So then, well, what do we do with this? We take this information, kind of put it into this schedule, if you will, just again to get a good understanding of how the spaces are being used. So, at the time when the schedule was put together, it accommodated 950 students, grades 6 through 8. Based on the overall utilization of all the spaces and all the sections, it really just shows us that right now you're using your classrooms about 5.3 out of 7 periods a day. Okay, so that's about a 75% utilization. Now we've looked at lots of other buildings, lots of other middle schools, and we're trying to land on maybe what's an appropriate utilization. Talking to the principal, looking at the schedule, what we really landed on was that even though they're using them 5.3, 5.75, maybe it might be more of an appropriate utilization, about 82%. And really what that means then is that, that you could accommodate, or the capacity, if you will, of this building based on how you're teaching your students, based on the number of sections of science or business or whatever that are being offered, you could accommodate about 1,000 students. So we're saying based on a utilization of 5.75 out of 7 periods, 82%, your capacity, if you will, is 1,000 students. That's really how we came up with that. Similarly, at the high school, same sort of understanding of how the different spaces are being used. Again, pretty common utilization of general classrooms, all these 1s and 2s, 1s up here. Science is the green in the center, so pretty heavy utilization of science. A lot of 1s, there's a 2. Some of your specialized spaces, industrial tech, not utilized as much. There's some pretty specific spaces, and you can't really, you can't teach math or English in a, auto shop, that sort of a thing. So that's not uncommon. Art, 1 space is used 7 out of 7, the other 2, a little less. Again, we just use this to give us an understanding of how your building's being used and how much it's being used. So this schedule is based on 1,236 students, and the overall utilization was about 5 out of 7 periods a day. So a little bit less, about 72% than the middle school. And again, working with the same sort of understanding of utilization of high schools. We said that we believe that 5.75 out of 7 periods is maybe an appropriate utilization that one could achieve. So based on that, it says that your capacity is about 1,300 students. Again, once you get more students than 1,300, what that would mean is you would start to kick in. It would start to say that on the right-hand column where it says stations needed, you'd start to see that we need, more classrooms or another science room, things like that. So that's how we landed on that utilization or capacity of your high school. So, based on that, this is what we did. So, based on what I just said, we looked at your current enrollment. So this is just an understanding of where you are currently. Elementary K through 5, you've got the 3 elementary schools, and those are the number of students currently in each one. So about 1,623 K through 5. Grades 6 through 8 at the middle school, 950, and then at the high school, 1,236. So that was just really documenting the number of students currently with a total of 3,809 K-12. Then looking at the enrollments, so then this again was just a comment about, how we came up with these capacities. So at the kindergarten through 5th grade elementary schools, we just said that if you had an average section of 25 students per classroom, okay, K through 5, and you've got 72 sections, that equals 1,800 students, and we said theoretical capacity. So theoretically, at each of your 4-section elementaries, you could have really 600 students. And we say theoretical because we know that, students all don't arrive in increments of 25, and sometimes you might have a bubble of a certain grade level, but that kind of explains the complexity of, what's the capacity of your buildings? Well, it's not so easy. But anyway, based on that, we said capacity, theoretical capacity of your elementaries is 1,800 students. Now, also keep in mind that that really doesn't address some of those, program accommodation / educational adequacy comments that I brought up. I mean, it still says that you have, 900 square foot kindergarten rooms, and that you might have approximately 25 students in the kindergarten room. It still says that, some of those other special needs spaces are there, that you're trying to fit maybe, 2 students and staff in a smaller room. So that doesn't take into consideration some of those items that I brought up earlier, okay? And then lastly, the middle school, high school, as I said, looking at, utilizing those maybe more efficiently if one needed to, at 5.75 out of 7. You could have 1,000 at the middle school and 1,300 at the high school. So then we looked at that compared to the enrollment projections and demographics that Hazel Reinhardt presented at the last board meeting. And based on what I heard Hazel say, she said when you're looking at enrollment, she said you should look at the high K, the high kindergarten, high migration number, is what I remember her saying. So that's what I did. So I used her high K, high migration, projecting out for 5 years to the 2018-19 school year. And so at the very bottom is where I indicated what her projections were, and the line right above it is where I indicated what our capacities were. So you can say I said a capacity of 1,800, asterisk means theoretical capacity, at the elementaries, 1,000, middle school, 1,300, high school. Her enrollment projections were indicating in the year 2018-19 about 1,412 elementary, 954 middle school, and 1,322 high school. So, what I was trying to say is that elementary, when I say 388 available, that's kind of saying that you've got like 388 extra spaces, if you will. Do you know what I mean? At the middle school, 46, which is, pretty close. And at the high school, 22 short. So total projected enrollment of 3,688 with capacity of 4,100. So district-wide, theoretically, maybe 412 kind of extra spaces, if you will. And then I did one more because she did kind of a 10-year enrollment projection, and I know she said it's really hard to really look out much past 5 years, but I did that one as well. So her enrollment projections brought it out to 20,023-24. And if I recollect, I think those numbers even went down a little bit more. She had talked about a decrease of about 200 students over the next 10 years. But similar look at it was elementary, about 1,520 students. So 280. So yeah, there's actually a little bit of an increase in the number of elementary students, because the previous 5 years you were at a projection of 1,412, and 5 years later you had about 1,520. And then, but the middle school dropped a little bit, 791, so a little bit more, 209 available. And then at the high school, just a little teeny drop, where now you're theoretically 6 short, whereas 5 years previous you're maybe 22 short. So district-wide, 2023, I'm saying that you're maybe 483 available, whereas the previous 5 years we were about 412. So I think in summary, and you guys I think know this, I think in summary that is saying that, like Hazel said, you've got some declining enrollment. It looks like in terms of capacity of your buildings, even though the caveat about the elementary and the boundaries and, trying to get 600 kids, nicely fit into each elementary, district-wide, it seems like, capacity at your buildings looks like it would accommodate, the 5 and 10 year enrollment projections. So I hope I didn't bore you too much, but I think it was just trying to show that, we're really trying to get a good foundation, a good understanding of how your buildings are used, the size of your spaces, the educational adequacy of your spaces. And I think those were really important slides that had the bubbles that talked about needs. And some needs might be more important than others. And right now we didn't necessarily try to make a determination about which ones were more important. Just wanted to share with you some of the deficiencies that were identified. And I guess with that, maybe I'll go to my last slide, and then I guess that's when I'll open it up for questions. But so then the next slide is the possible next steps. So at the top of the list here, we had the summary of the demographic study at the last board meeting. So tonight I shared with you the facility assessment deferred maintenance needs, although not in detail, and I would plan to do that at an upcoming meeting, maybe a board work session, and then hopefully shared with you our understanding of your utilization and capacity analysis. There was talk about maybe an upcoming board meeting, as I mentioned, to share with you a little bit more of the detail of the facility assessment, try to strategize about maybe what some of our priorities are in terms of maybe some of the deficiencies we identified, whether it be security, whether it be some of the mechanical deferred maintenance upgrades, whether it be even things like, do we keep leasing space in the district, some of the needs at each of the buildings that were identified, trying to prioritize those. We'd like to share with you what we call a directions presentation. It's kind of a directions/trends presentation. The thought being that you're used to these facilities, and maybe things are working just great, but there are other things that are being identified in terms of 21st century learning and the appropriate type of spaces maybe for students. The thought being that we'd like to share with you some of these ideas so that when we start looking at your facilities and needs, you might have some thoughts about, well, maybe we should try to incorporate some of these things into our buildings, or maybe not, but just trying to share with you some of the things that we're seeing out there nationally and locally even. And then, once we identify some of the priorities, if you will, that might start give us a direction on some of the preliminary facility options. And then if we have maybe an idea of an option or two, take that information out and share it with the stakeholders, share it with the staff, share it with the students and the community, get their input on the direction that we're moving, potentially. Coming back, gaining that input from the stakeholders, kind of refining the plan, developing a district facilities plan, and then eventually through options, et cetera, coming to a very final facilities master plan. I think Dr. Richardson mentioned that costs, you'd say, well, geez, Mark, you got all these ideas of, replacing mechanical units, and what if we had to do some of the things that you commented about, like kindergarten classrooms? If we made every kindergarten room 1,200 square feet, what's that do to us? Well, we can do that cost analysis. We have a good database of projects that we've worked on in terms of additions, alterations, whatever. So we could share that information with you to help make some decisions if needed. So with that long presentation, I wanted to thank you, but also open it up to questions and comments.
Thank you. Questions? No?
It seems to be common that the kindergarten rooms are small. Has the DOE standard changed since the designs were approved by the state? Or what is the cause of the rooms being small?
Yeah.
I think all buildings have to be approved by the state Department of Education, don't they?
Yes, I would say that is true. If I may, let me just go back and find some examples, because, as I had mentioned, sorry, a lot of slides. I know that, as I mentioned, at Greenville Park,
Yes.
kindergarten used to be at the front door on the right, when it was when you did not have all-day kindergarten. So you had two kindergarten rooms, larger kindergarten rooms to the right, and then for other reasons, security, etc., those were moved to that left side of the building into kind of regularly sized classrooms. There's one example.
Yeah, Sibley's probably the next one.
Sibley, another one.
Yeah, because you can take a look at the one room that was a kindergarten room.
Right, and I think I had a mistake on my slide, because when I presented this, I mentioned that the one looked larger at the lower left, but when you saw my chart where it said it showed all the kindergarten rooms, it didn't show that one was larger at Sibley, so I need to look at that. But it does appear to me, I believe that this one was a kindergarten room, and I think this one to the lower right was a kindergarten room. So those were the two kindergarten rooms. And now we have all-day kindergarten, and so 3 classrooms have been converted to kindergarten rooms. And, I don't know about Bridgewater, but I also understand that at one time, is it Longfellow was a kindergarten center?
Kindergarten center.
Was a kindergarten center. Oh yeah, here's the example of Greenville Park. There's the what used to be kindergarten rooms over here, now the 4 over there on the left-hand side. And then, yeah, so I'm not sure about Bridgewater, because it looked to me like all of the Bridgewater classrooms were all similarly sized. I really couldn't find a room that looked like it was designed as a kindergarten room. So I just don't know if maybe at the time the kindergarten center existed and these were all general classrooms. I'm really not certain.
Yeah. In 1998, when that building was built, basically you had all of the half-day programming was done at Longfellow, and only all-day sections, I think, were run at the individual buildings. And that would have been even very new in 98, because there was a chunk of time when all the kindergarten?
Yes.
I think all the kindergarten was at Longfellow.
Well, I think if you think about it too, 1998 being our newest facility, kindergarten has changed dramatically. Even since that time, when I was an elementary principal, I would give parents the heads up that this is not your mother's kindergarten. I mean, in the last decade, kindergarten has changed dramatically. And I don't think that the MDE guidelines are the same today that they were when Greenville Park was built in 1970 or when Sibley was built in the early 60s. So I think it's also a function of how things have changed over the years and the much broader focus on early learning.
And I would say too, I've seen other ways, because even though the students are smaller, I mean, there's the activity centers where they're doing all sorts of different things. There's all sorts of materials in the rooms that you've seen, and I've seen creative ways to deal with it, where you might take 3 or 4 kindergarten rooms, and they might share. Woodson Kindergarten Center in Austin. We worked on that one, where what they did is they took a certain number of rooms, converted it to kind of a they called it their, I'm forgetting the name of it, but their activity center. So it was like the activity center. And all the classrooms were typical classroom size, but then they would just kind of schedule and share the activity center. So they just schedule it and the students move into the activity space and use those activities, but they had typical classrooms. Or sometimes you might have more of a common space shared by a certain number of kindergarten rooms, where again, that's kind of where the activity center type stuff is. But the classrooms are more general-sized kindergarten classrooms, if there's such a need. Yeah.
And again, of the 3, both Sibley and Greenville Park had a restroom built into the classroom of all the original kindergarten classrooms. Bridgewater never did have restrooms built into any of the classroom spaces.
Right.
And of course, the other thing that's a core here is you look at the kind of the center corridor, Bridgewater, and other areas within the other buildings, is there was very little special education programming in buildings beyond kind of a core LD programming. Most of the programs that were for students with greater and more significant needs were done outside the system. So we were busing a lot more kids to 917 and to, and I'm trying to remember the name of the center in Faribault. There was a Special Ed Program Center in Faribault. Whipple Heights, exactly. So we did not really have a significant number of special education classrooms. Again, even in '98, there was a much more limited perception of what that was going to look like. Now, on top of that, now we've added, Accelerate Northfield. We've added the programming for the
Reading Corps, Math Corps.
reading
Right.
180, Read 180 programming, lots of other things that have been added into the system to support the needs of kids. And then the fact that we basically have drawn back in all of our programs for kids with greater levels of special ed need. Until we get to level 4 students, almost all the other programming is back here. So the EBD program, the LI program, the autism spectrum program, the DCD program, all of those programs are now inside our buildings and would be difficult probably to extract now because of special education perspective of creating least restrictive environment, that the idea of taking a student out of their home building and taking them somewhere else, or out of the district and taking them somewhere else, ends up creating something that's not going to be considered the least restrictive environment except for some of our most needy kids.
Other questions?
That was the 50-cent answer, no to the 5-cent question.
Julie?
Let's see. AHU, what does that stand for some of the?
Air handling unit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That was easy.
Not for me.
John?
Your projections are, if I could just summarize this, that really the elementary schools will be close to capacity and the middle school will be close to capacity. The high school will really be basically at capacity. Is that?
Yeah, I believe so. Right. I mean, when it said we're short by 6 or 22 students, I mean that's those
finding
numbers.
Another classroom space.
Yeah, I mean that's like an extra student in just a handful of classes.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Thank you.
So I had a follow-up question on when Dr. Richardson, you were talking about the special ed populations, and I was
Correct.
curious when you talked about the MDE standards, those are averages. So I wondered how our district compared in terms of the type of specialized spaces compared to the other districts you've worked with, and how does that factor in when you're looking at these average capacities? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I should say, let me just try to go to, from a elementary standpoint.
Well, that probably would be where it really hits, right?
Yeah, from an elementary standpoint, special ed is really just so, I guess, maybe unique to districts in terms of some of their needs. So, I would say there's really not a good guideline from a Department of Ed standard as to like the number of special ed or special needs spaces that you need. Again, like Dr. Richardson was mentioning, the Accelerate Northfield or Math Corps, or maybe you guys are getting grants for some of these type of programs. So I don't think there really is a good MDE guideline for like the number of special needs spaces. What we do tend to do is we tend to create some standards for elementary schools in a district where we would start to say, we really need to have a certain number of special needs rooms. We need this for Math Corps, this for Reading Corps, we need this and that. And then we start to say, and then based on the number of students, whether it's a couple students and a staff member, that space is a certain size. And then you start to overlay that template on your elementary schools to say, what are we lacking? But I would say the Department of Ed really doesn't have a standard for some of those special needs spaces. They have square footage recommendations, but not like the numbers of spaces.
I'd say oftentimes it's more driven by the guidelines and or the requirements in terms of the maximum number of students that can be served in certain programs. So it tends to be in those programs that are for the students of highest need. Oftentimes those numbers are limited to like 6 or 8 students. And it's mainly because where you might have 6 or 8 students, you might have just as many adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have a aide for each of the students, plus a teacher or 2 to take care of the needs of those students. So, you know, you've got a chart that shows standards, but they really just break it out as there's a small group standard of 450, you know, as a minimum for a small group, or 800 for a classroom, or 1,200 for a lab. But the reality is, it is very dependent on the kinds of programs that are offered. So where our district offers a number of programs to meet a higher level of need than some other districts. So, you know, the needs we have for space, like for the NB program, or for the LI program, or for the DCD program, are significantly greater for a smaller number of kids than, let's say, if it was an LD program or a mild moderate program where you could have more students in one classroom being served by one teacher and a smaller number of aides. So I think that the thing that we just face always is as we look at the numbers, and I think Mark was very clear with you in terms of, you know, when you create that magic maximum number of students for the elementary at 1,800, you know, you're operating again with the idea of you're going to get exactly 25 kids in every single classroom, and kids don't come that way. And I also would say to you, you would be getting a lot of pushback, I think, from parents if we were trying to create every kindergarten space with 25 kids in it, because the levels of need of our kindergarten students across the district and the need for space for all of the different kinds of materials and activities that they do, you know, we're typically in a range that's more like 20 to 22 students at both kindergarten and first grade, sometimes even less than 20, where it's much more realistic that you would get to that 25 students when you get into especially the 4th and 5th grade, and maybe even higher, because as you know, we've had some elementary classrooms over the last decade that have approached 30, 31 students in 5th grade or 4th grade classroom space. So there is some overlap there, but I think the good thing with what Mark's provided you is it's kind of at least looking at the overall target. And I think the message is, if we were coming back to talk about a facilities master plan where we were talking about building onto buildings or building new buildings because we're going to have a great deal of need for additional space for kids, the information that you've heard tonight would say that's not really a good reason. The flip side is, if you're looking at what do you need to do to buildings to make them viable for the next 20 years, you've seen in terms of the educational needs a significant number of things that are not as they should be. And whether that's phy-ed space, special ed space, science space in this building, whether it's the fact that we have some undersized core spaces like cafeterias in several buildings. You heard cafeteria really isn't big enough to meet the needs. And you've also, I think, heard about, you know, the fact that what happens is if you bump outside of that perfect classroom size, and like Nancy this summer dealing with, I need a 5th section of kindergarten because we're at 100 plus kids, suddenly we have to go in and say we've got to move special ed students out of a classroom space and into something smaller so that we can make sure that we've got a 5th classroom space. And will that be every year? No, I don't think so. And in fact, I think, again, we're seeing the enrollment coming down in the elementary. But the issue is, given the fact that even though we show that we have excess capacity in terms of space, is there enough flexibility in the room spaces we have to to address the needs when we have them. That's one of the key questions you're going to have to talk about and discuss as we go forward with this facilities planning process.
Other questions? Julie?
I just had one more, and I know it's pretty much, it's very early on in terms of Greenbelt Park and the grant for the community school and what that might do for the need for agencies and other social service type work that potentially could be done in that building, you know, outside of the classroom needs, and you know, how that will factor in. Certainly not something we can answer now, but that potentially in the Greenbelt Park school be an issue.
It's going to be an issue not only for programming for kids, which, although the good part there is the significance of that part of that programming will be after school, evening, summer. But if the other piece is how do we make a welcoming environment for parents who might want to come in and take an ABE class or take some other type of class while their students were at school, and they would come drop off their students, they'd go to school too, and then they leave. The spaces available to do that are extremely limited, and will continue to be that way.
Questions? I had one more, but technology infrastructure. Did you look at that as an issue at all? No.
We did not look at that so much. I think that's something where we could work with the district to identify some of those needs, and that might be more of a kind of a budget placeholder in terms of what the funding might be needed for technology upgrades. But I don't think we really did delve into that much.
Well, I mean, the really good piece we've had at this point is we have done a significant amount of the infrastructure in terms of the wiring of the buildings, the wireless connectivity. Pretty much anywhere in every building now we have wireless access. Probably one of the big issues that we are looking at over the next several years will be the potential to gain some space back if we get to the point where the Department of Ed would ever move from an antiquated system of pushing out assessments that would give us the ability to have students access testing on an iPad.
And we're starting to see some of the national assessment groups, like for example, the MAP will be available on the there are some schools that have already started to do that. So that is coming down the pike faster than. I think that that's a great example, though. One of our core values in the district is stewardship. And I think that from the technology infrastructure perspective over the last 15 years, the district has been excellent stewards. We had fiber optic connectivity between our buildings well before lots of other places did, and we're doing that on a lease basis, so it was relatively reasonable. We're finally dealing with a big problem that we have been trying to figure out for several years. How do we serve the NCRC? We have an antiquated connection there. We finally found a point-to-point wireless connection that will give them very high-speed access. And if I were to characterize what I heard Mark say tonight, is that we have been excellent stewards of our infrastructure and our facilities. When Mark goes to some schools, I'm going to characterize how I think some of these meetings go. A district is in crisis with its facilities. Either they've grown too fast and they are bursting at the seams, or they have kept pushing off projects and pushing off projects. And in some cases, you're telling people, if you don't take care of this, they're going to condemn your building. You've done those presentations before, too. This goes back to what we've said. We're operating from a position of strength. We are trying, we know that our facilities are not in crisis right now. But we also know if we don't have an eye toward the future, he could have been here giving that presentation, which none of us would have wanted to do. So I think overall, Paul Bell, the current custodian of the 10-year plan on our facilities piece, going back to Kevin Larson and Don Warhol before, all did an excellent job. You know what Denise Griffith did here to start and what we tried to continue, and we're handing off to Kim. We've really focused on making sure those core facilities, not necessarily the size of them, but that those spaces have been well maintained. And I think that's one of the highest compliments we hear tonight, is that you guys have taken good care of your stuff, and our community should know that.
Yeah,
This is a more fun presentation, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah,
than some of the
yeah.
others you go
No,
to?
you're right, I definitely concur with that, and you're right, many
You're
times.
not seeing the pitchforks and the firebrands yet.
Right,
so-
but you're right, many times my list of deferred maintenance items is just giant, it's just huge, and honestly, walking your facilities, it's like, they look very good, very well maintained, yes.
But I think we're also trying to say to you, you don't stay that way by not taking a long view. Because over the next 10 to 20 years, as Mark's indicated, about half of the buildings are going to need roofs that haven't gotten roofs before, and big roofing spaces. We see a building that's still steam heat, when every other building now is hot water. And we know that the age of that system is going to require us to do something different. We know that across the district we have multiple facilities where we can't provide the highest security capabilities because the buildings were not built with the office out front of the building, which almost every new building now has the office. The first thing you walk into is the office, and then you have a workaround or walk around to get you into the building. So at a certain point in time, all the other doors are locked off, and if you want to come in, you go through, check in the office, and then go on into the building. We have Bridgewater that has that significant distance. We have Greenville Park that doesn't have a significant distance, but is off to the side so that people can walk straight through. We have the middle school, which I think, have made a pretty good dent in with a very, very almost brilliant insight on the part of Paul Bell to say, what if we create this like an NSA screening station? And that's basically what we got, and it's working great. And then, of course, the high school, which is the 43-door monster, that has all of these access points. And even though we have really reduced the number of access points by locking down, again, you could, if you come in and get through the front door, you can go anywhere in the building and never see the office. And basically the same thing back at the district office door. So, there are really there's some fairly significant issues and needs that we, I think, need to approach. But I think what this has done is given us a really good, as we talked before a lot of times, this is the 30,000-foot view. 30,000-foot view of what's the condition of our facilities, what are the educational needs we have, what are the deferred maintenance needs that we have, and at that point then I think we're ready to take some next steps in the process. Okay.
All right, very good. So if there's no other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for such a thorough presentation.
My pleasure, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, we are ready to move on to our third item, which is very much related.
Yes.
The follow-up work session to discuss the demographic and facility presentation.
Exactly, and that's why we're glad that Mark was able to stick around and kind of hear this next discussion, because this is the piece where I think we now take kind of the next step in the process. So obviously over this last couple of months, you've had an opportunity to get a demographic study and a housing unit study. So we know what our anticipated enrollments are for the next 10 years. We know what anticipated housing starts and neighborhood enrollments are going to look like. And we now have done kind of the first part of the facility study where we've said, what are the building repair and maintenance needs? What are the educational program needs? What current facilities capabilities do we have that could address current and future educational needs? And what are the facilities limitations? And in bubble format, we've kind of laid out in each of the buildings, what are those capabilities, what are those limitations going forward? So our belief is the next piece that needs to happen is to have a work session, and the focus of that work session, where you could be as fresh as possible because it would be all about discussing this topic, would be really to take a look at what we've identified as kind of the three key facilities questions. So we're going to look at maintenance and repair priorities. Mark basically has already got ballpark figures for every one of those deferred maintenance bullets. So he can tell you in each of the buildings, you know, what's the cost of replacing the air handling units? What's the cost of doing window replacement or roof replacement or whatever? So that we're actually going to be able to look at those numbers. But we felt it wasn't appropriate to try to hit you with all the numbers at the same time we did this, because we felt it's just too much. But we would be ready to do that at that session. The second piece we'd be looking at wanting to do is, I think, to have a really frank discussion on, you know, can we address part of this issue through modification of enrollment boundaries? Because as you know, over the last several years, we've talked about the concerns about trying to totally balance up the number of students in each building, with the idea that if we do that, we give Nancy some relief in her building in terms of space. We potentially give Scott some relief in his building in terms of space, and we more closely fill up Greenville Park. And yet at the same time, as you've heard tonight, some of the issues we're facing are, if Greenville Park is going to become a community school and is going to end up with the need for space for other resources, maybe it's appropriate for that building to stay smaller. But we've got to put our arms around the concept of saying, what are we willing to do to try to balance numbers? And some really tough questions. Are you as a board willing to say, let's look at where you are assigned to go to school based on your attendance area, and you will go to that school. And there are no exemptions. There are no exceptions. That's going to be a really tough piece if you would go there. Because if you think about for much longer than I've been here, we've had exceptions for you got a babysitter that's in another attendance area. You've got other things going on that make it more convenient for you. You've got open enrolled students who live closer to the Faribault Northfield border than they do to the Farmington Northfield border, and so they tend to want to go to the building that's closest to their community, because they're going to be transporting their kids to the building that they're going to for elementary. And we need to really decide what are we willing to do, and what we potentially might be the impacts of doing that. Because if the impact is you balance the numbers only to have parents and students choose to leave the district because they don't like the fact that they have no options anymore, will it actually be worth it? Will it really get you where you want to go? And I think that's a tough question, but I think it's one that as a board you need to grapple with. Because if that isn't a solution to try to get at this, we need to kind of know that now. And we need to move forward with, no, that's not going to be the resolution. Because I think we've tried off and on over the last few years to try to, I'm trying to think what the appropriate description, put the genie back in the bottle, to really kind of move people back and say, no, you really need to go to the attendance area you were assigned to, because this is where the boundaries are. And what we find is over and over again, people then will make whatever choices they need. They'll find a new babysitter. They will tell us a place that they're located, or they will tell us a place that their babysitter is located. And unless we do the follow-up of actually tracking down that parent and that student to find out is that actually what's happening, we really don't know. So we know how powerful choice has been in this system in terms of giving people the opportunity to do that. We also know that over and over again, we've seen that the only thing that has kept us from having a real significant drop in enrollment with the implementation of the 2 charter schools in the last decade has been that we have a very positive influx of open enrollees into the system. We have a lot more kids coming from other school districts into Northfield than we have students going from Northfield to other school districts. But we also have about 400 kids who are currently going to the 2 charter schools in our district, which is a significant number. And we also have students that are going to St. Dom's. And so we also need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that the coin of the realm in terms of being able to provide programming for kids is having enough kids to generate the basic formula money. And when you lose 10 kids or 20 kids or 50 kids, those are real dollars. And that impacts your ability to hire staff and maintain staff and do all the things that we worked so hard to do over the last decade, and with the efforts of both of our operating levies and the willingness of our community to step up and do that. Those have all been reasons we've been able to get that to happen. So I think we have to answer that question, and I think a work session is the place to have that kind of discussion. And then finally, I think it's looking at beyond the deferred maintenance pieces, which again, I think is Mark's ready to say to you, well, if you think this is important, understand that these are going to be the kind of costs that are going to be involved. The other piece is taking a look at what are the things that were identified as educational needs. If you look at it and think about all those bubble diagrams that he shared with you, if you think about those pieces. So what would it take if we had to create space in buildings so we could have restrooms in kindergarten rooms, or have kindergarten rooms that were the right size? And what would we need to do to the building to make that happen? Is it physically possible to do that to the building? Thinking about whether that can be done with remodeling or additions. Thinking about what's the future in terms of the best quality programming when we have programs like those programs provided by community services that are spread out over several spaces. And the fact that you have some of early childhood family ed and special ed and early childhood programming at Longfellow, and you have another chunk of it at the NCRC. And you have staff that are located in office in one space that are actually trying to not only be there so that they can meet with people that they need to in community services, but also need to be in the other space in order to support and supervise directly the programs that they're running. So it could be thinking about remodeling additions. It could be thinking about repurposing a building. Are there some issues in any of the buildings that would say there's a better way of using this space? One of the things you've heard multiple times is the biggest expense for no good purpose that we have in the district. Boy, maybe I'm overreaching myself, but it's probably the Rock House. We have a space that we're using to help provide life skills for high school kids. Great idea. But when we have to spend 15 minutes to get them there and 15 minutes to get them back, what does that do to the quality of the programming that we provide? And how different would that be if that special education life skills apartment was located right inside the building? And also, unfortunately, because the Rock House, because of when it was built and how it was set up, still runs on propane. And you remember what happened to propane last winter, and what it cost us to heat that very small space because propane went off the charts. So it's thinking about what that needs to look like, and it's also thinking about is there a point when repurposing needs to occur, or where we would ever think about having another building or a different building than what we currently have. All of which takes us way out in terms of that discussion. So we also know that we have this thinking that we need to do, considering the amount of dollars that we have available. Our next source of additional revenue would occur in 2016, I believe, Matt, which is the next time we have one of our alt facilities kinds of bonds will come due. And that will put some dollars back, not a huge amount of dollars, but we'll put some dollars back that we could actually use our existing capital budget to fund without seeing any tax increase. But if we go beyond that, or we need something additional to that, then we face the option of saying, are we willing to go back to the community and ask for any more dollars in terms of a bond issue? All sorts of big questions. And probably some that we're not going to get done in 2 or 3 hours of a work session. But what I'd like to see us do is begin to move ourselves towards answering some of the big questions. And I think at our next work session, I think the purpose would be sit down and really take a look at the bubble blocks that Mark has provided and actually start to put some dollars on those. Think about and group them in terms of saying how much of this is involved with security, how much is involved in terms of air handling units, how much is involved in terms of envelope of building or roofs, and think about what each of those pieces looks like. Have the discussion around the boundary piece and the potential of using existing boundaries to make that happen, but would require those pieces of changing the kind of the stance the board's taken in the past. And then I think the third piece is begin to have Mark lay out for us if we were to try to address those building needs, what kind of dollar figures are we looking at to begin to address those? With the idea that in the end, the process we're moving toward is actually developing facilities priority options, which is really what Mark's talking about when he talks about a district master plan. That you've actually laid it out, that you've actually said, of all the things we've looked at here, here are the things that we think are potential priorities. And then we're going to need to go and sit down with staff, and students, and parents, and community members and say, look, here's everything we've thought about here. Give us your feedback. But remember, in the end, as board members, this one's your decision. But what I don't want to do is to have us go too much farther down the road without having that roadmap in place. I think we've done a great job of stewardship. We've done a great job of doing, with a very limited amount of money, a lot of good things in the system. You know, we've gotten a lot of the roofs replaced. We are tuck pointing some buildings now. We're beginning to really address those pieces, but there are some other really major things going in that we're going to have to be prepared to address, and we're going to have to decide in priority order, do we get those deferred maintenance pieces done? Is this the right way to go? Do we do something else to the rock house, or do we figure out a way to tear it down and use a different space? You know, do we continue to lease the NCRC, or do we do something different? So those are all the kinds of things that I think are out there that need to play out. And so what I would like to recommend to you is that you consider a work session where we can have ATS&R and as many of our cabinet members and Paul and other folks be involved, so we can actually sit down and try to address and begin to take a look at these pieces, and you can help us to say, if we were going to put these in priority order, what would they look like? So let me just ask what questions you might have about that, and then we could talk about what might be a reasonable time to try to set up a work session for folks.
Works for me.
Any questions about the agenda at all?
It's time.
Okay. And Mark, does that make sense to you? Okay. Okay. All right. So if yes, people are interested in making this happen, let's talk about when we can do this. So I think that if we think about it, you know, we've actually we have two windows. You know, one window is between now and the 20. And what date is that you're going to be headed to Paris? The 25th? Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct, okay. And so one option would be to try to get it done here at the end of July or the first part of August. The alternative would be to wait until after school starts again and would do it in a week between board meetings. So, I know Ellen has been kind enough to actually send us dates that she's available. And it looks like she's available several times before the 21st of August, or we can go into September. So, and kind of the window, and on your other end of your trip is the 12th?
14th.
14th, okay.
I'm leaving the 18th. of
So as
August.
people look at calendars, again, I think your two windows then are really kind of anywhere between now and the end of July, or between August 1 and August 20-something. Or it would be after school starts in September. Any thoughts in terms of which way you'd want to go?
I prefer to do it during the summer.
Okay, when it's a
Yeah,
little less
August or
crazy.
July.
Before you leave.
I also have some spots where I'm not going to be here.
Before that?
Yep, 29th of July to 6th of August.
6th of August. Okay.
How much time are we talking about? I mean, we're not talking about several days. I presume it's.
Yeah, bring pajamas, because
I'm hoping we're talking a day or
it may be a
something like
longer
that, not a
piece.
week or two.
No, I really think, again, realistically, what I think, we can do is, I still think that you don't want to go more than 3 hours. I think you lose the ability to focus and concentrate after 3 hours.
I would suggest 2 or 3 hours in a morning session, take a break, have lunch, sort our thoughts out, and come back for a little bit of a wrap up.
So you're thinking hit it on a Saturday then?
On a Saturday?
Well, I'm just thinking I got 1, 2.
Some of us work, no.
What, don't you have vacation?
No.
John, you're running for public office. You need to take a break.
I honestly was thinking we were probably talking about an evening.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Take a
okay,
nap.
if we talk 7 to 10 o'clock.
Earlier.
All right, so let me throw some dates out then, and let me know if you can't.
Can you just show of hands if we can make it? or
Yeah,
something?
okay. Evan's first date, she says, is available is the 22nd of July.
Yeah, I'm not available on
We don't know what
Tuesdays for
Carrie
the
and
next
Rob are.
10 weeks.
Okay, is that the 22nd?
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna cross that out.
But
All right.
Does Rob come back, Christy? That's
Rob
comes back the 20th.
comes back on the 20th.
We have no idea what Carrie's schedule is.
Maybe
No,
some-
and that's the thing we'll want to do, is once we think
Narrow-
we've gotten.
you wanna narrow down
Narrow it down to a
Yeah.
few dates, and
For
then go to
Danita,
Carrie
and she can-
and Rob and say, can this work? What about the 23rd of July?
I'm available.
Yeah, no, I'm out the 21st through the 29th.
Okay.
21st through the 29th.
So we're thinking August then.
All right,
I think
so,
we're realistic.
thank you, that helps,
Probably make
that
it
gets us,
happen.
okay. August 4th,
Wait, no, Anne's gone for the 6th.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
we're
I'm
looking
gone.
at August 7th.
I'm here August 7th.
I'm good. I'm really good anytime in August.
Done.
You're here raising it.
For August 7th?
okay,
August
August
7th.
August 7,
That's possible.
And then you leave not till the end, so we have a few
Yeah.
more dates in August.
3
we could
more
look at.
weeks.
okay. So is August 7 okay for everybody here?
Yeah.
All right, then what about August 13? I know that's community service or community youth fairs, isn't it, that night? Probably gonna be hard because that's gonna pull all the cabinet folks away.
Okay.
What about the 14th?
14th.
Mhm.
That's good.
Okay, that work, John,
Yep.
for you? Okay. And what about the 19th?
not available on Tuesdays.
Tuesday, sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, and the 20th of August?
Okay?
That
Yep.
works.
All right.
And what about the 21st of August?
All right.
Okay,
That gives us 4 days in August.
that gives us 4 days.
Yeah.
And I think I'm hearing, let's try to get a date before school starts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to turn right to Mark and say, Mark, how are those days looking on your calendar?
And actually, every one of those dates work well with me.
Wow.
Oh. All right.
Cool. So the 7th, the 14th, the 20th, or the 21st?
Mhm.
Okay. So I will have Danita do some sleuthing for us, see if we can line up other folks, and we will shoot for one of those dates.
Great.
Super. Any other thoughts in terms of the work session, in terms of any other things that you think need to be addressed or part of that? Or will that cover it for you? I'm thinking we got probably way more than 3 hours
Yeah.
worth of discussion, but I think we can get started and get a good start. Super. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right, we are ready to move on to our items for individual action. And
Yes, we go from the sublime to the mundane, or
to
ridiculous.
Christopher Columbus.
Yes.
Yes.
In 1492.
All right.
Yes.
So every year it seems like we need to do this resolution.
Correct.
And the superintendent's recommendation is to approve the resolution regarding Christopher Columbus Day, so that we will not have it be a holiday.
So moved.
Moved by Julie.
Second.
Second by Noel, and this will have to be a roll call vote. Is there any questions about it first? No? Okay.
We've done the same thing for
Yeah.
Yep.
Ever.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ready for the roll
Mhm.
call? Okay. Maple?
Aye.
Pritchard?
Aye.
Stratton?
Aye.
Iverson?
Aye.
Fossum?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, our second item for individual action is the revised school board policy 514, the bullying prohibition that received so much attention at the legislature this spring. And board members, you had in your packet both the proposed and the current bullying prohibition policy, and we've had lots of time to sink our teeth into it and review it. If we have any discussion, I'd like to have a motion on the table first. Moved by Noel to approve the revised policy.
Second.
Seconded by Julie. Any discussion, any comments or questions? Julie?
I had one question. Do we know if, there was all talk about potential additional costs or use of resources to implement? Has there been any significant costs established that we're aware of?
I think the biggest piece with this right now is we believe that we have mitigated a lot of the issues because we've got a much better definition of bullying than we had before. The only concern I think that all of us have right now is to what extent when school starts, whether there will be parents that will go, I really don't understand, what bullying really is or isn't. And so we may get a spike in the number of people that are calling in saying, I believe my child has been bullied, which at that point then we'll have to do the appropriate investigation to get that done. But again, with this policy in place, the frame around it is this concept of it needs to be a recurring event. It can't be a singular incident. And the second piece is that there needs to be either real or perceived difference in balance of power. And so, a lot of the incidents that might otherwise have been identified as bullying aren't going to be because it's two students with basically the same footing. I think just like anything else of this nature in which you have now created a new perception, there will be a settling down period where people will have to sort out what really is there and not. And my belief is that administrators are going to be faced potentially with more people coming to them saying, is this a bullying incident or not? and they'll need to spend time with those individuals getting that part sorted out and determining whether we need to do an investigation or not. Is that a long-term piece? I'm not necessarily sure that it is. We've asked for additional resources to help do that. The other thing that I think is in a much better position is originally when we talked about concerns, it was because there was going to be this huge MDE requirement to put all the data into some kind of special database so that they could look at bullying. And now, from what I can see, it very likely is going to be rolled into the DRS, the
Disciplinary
Incident
Incident
Reporting System, DRS. I like DRR better because it just sounds like whatever. But if it ends up rolling into that piece, that's something that principals have to do all through the year already. So if we now are just identifying, as well as other kinds of incidents, whether it's fighting or whatever, if we identify an incident that really does qualify as bullying, my belief is that that's going to be the way it's going to be reported, as opposed to having to do this separate and very onerous process. Plus, we're also given additional time to get it done. You don't have to even start an investigation until 3 days out, although I will promise you that'll never happen unless it happens on Friday, unless the incident occurs on Friday afternoon and you can't get back to the kids till Monday morning, because principals aren't going to let that happen. So I think we're going to be okay.
The training piece is just that other
Yeah.
small part that while we didn't have to necessarily pay a ton for the resource, there's going to have to be some time that's dedicated to it. And then there's going to have to be some management over time, because we're going to have to ensure that people who are new to the system as adults have the ability to be trained. And so while the financial cost isn't as great as we initially thought, there certainly is a commitment in time on the part of our professionals to be trained and maintain that training. Don't think it's a bad thing. It's just that you asked about what are the costs. That is clearly one of them as well.
That'll be a piece.
But I was encouraged to see that, so much of the training and education is really tied into already our site improvement plans and our DPAC goals. So I thought that really worked closely with that. And then in addition, I was encouraged to see the strong language about cyberbullying as well.
And the reality is, if there's anything that will probably give us more sleepless nights, that's going to be the piece, because it's going to be, in some cases, the hardest to identify, the hardest to prove, the hardest to actually develop the nexus back to the building in terms of does it actually have a negative impact on the student once they get back into the building. Because if everything about it is occurring outside of the building, and it's occurring with an individual who may be our student but then is doing something with a student that doesn't even live here, or doesn't go to school here, the ability to create nexus gets really difficult. So that's Julie, that's going to be I think that's going to be the most uncharted territory, because it really does broaden if you think about in the past as school districts, when we worked with children with discipline, we typically tried to work around. The farthest you got was when the students stepped off the bus or got on the bus. So anything that happened on the bus, anything that happened at the bus stop, probably you could deal with. If it happens on the way home from school or in somebody's yard at home, we're not going to deal with it, and we figured that's a piece where there's an issue, the parent needs to call the police. But with the cyberbullying piece, we now have some new expectations to track it down and really determine what's there, and that has the potential to be a bigger issue than anything else, especially at the secondary level.
Okay.
Good questions, though. Really good questions.
Other questions? Anne?
I have just some language suggestions for this. The consequences for students who commit prohibited acts of bullying may range, that section. I found kind of wordy,
Give me a page number, Ann. 514
514-2.
dash 2.
And it's just sort of simplifying the language and making it, I think, a little more clear. If we want to, I don't know if I need to do a motion to suggest that, or.
Well, we have right now we have a motion and a second on the table to approve it as is.
To approve it as is. So I think if you want to change the language, and again, the only, if there's any concern I have, Ann, it's just simply, I know as we've worked through this in the past with policies, we've done a lot with MSBA policies to try to streamline them. This one, I know that the attorneys have gone over this one with a fine-tooth comb because of the fact that they were trying to play back to going from a 39-word bullying statute to a multi-page bullying statute with lots of detail in it. So the only concern I'd have is if we're changing it, making sure that we don't change anything that creates a substantive change that then will catch us with not being in line with the statute anymore. And maybe, and maybe what you're suggesting wouldn't do that. I just don't know.
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
And so the wording we have here then, as I understand it, is acceptable.
This is MSBA has sat down with the attorneys.
Okay.
The attorneys took
Well,
the
I don't
statute.
think that's what that
The attorneys took the statute, said this is what your policy needs to say to comply with the statutory requirements. So, my initial gut is, if we want to change it, let's get something in place first, and then down the road, if we find this trips us up or causes us problems, we could come back and adjust rather than trying to adjust now and then being told, well, it doesn't.
I just found these redundancies that I.
Oh, well, as you remember, and Noel, I know, remembers from being on the policy committee in the past, MSBA is the redundancy queens. And
Lawyers like redundancy.
Yes, it's the.
Oh, sorry, John. I didn't mean to miss it.
So do landlords.
But it's just this one I'm a little bit nervous about because
I'd rather set that comment.
of that piece.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? No? All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the bullying prohibition policy 514 as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the consent grouping. I'll remind board members there are a number of items in your table file to include in the consent grouping, including bid agreements and personnel appointments. Anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent grouping? Julie?
I don't want to pull anything, but I do just want to make note that our Booster Club is donating $15,000, which is covering athletic fee waivers, and I think that's it's incredible great work that they do, and it's really providing a lot of opportunities for our students, and we're very grateful for their work.
Was it more than that?
15,004 was just to cover athletic fee waivers. So that's, overall, they're donating a total of almost 18,000, of which 15 is.
And this has been a recurring piece that the boosters have really stepped up and said, we want to give every student who wants to participate an opportunity to do so regardless of their financial situation. And so it's a great message for kids.
Absolutely.
Let's move the consent agenda.
Moved by John.
Second.
Seconded by Noel. All those in favor of approving say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The consent grouping is approved. We have two items for information. One is the 2014 reduction to local property taxes for school levies.
Right, and I just wanted to share this one because it's a piece of good news, and it does reflect the work that Schools for Equity and Education, of which Northfield has been a long-time member. And I've been a member of the legislative committee for 17 years, I believe. I've been the chair of it for about 10. The great work that C did in working with the legislature, and especially with the Senate, to really put together this particular proposal. What I think people do need to be aware of is when we think about the operating levies that we've had in the past, there was a time at the state level where there was a significant amount of equalization for districts like Northfield that could be used to offset the difference in the tax effort that various homeowners had to pay depending on the level of valuation in their districts. Over the course of time, that almost disappeared. And if you look at the information for Pay 13, we were down to where for the first $760 of operating levy, we got 5% of that from the state, and the other 95% was paid for by the local taxpayers. Everything above $760 up to our total referendum was 100% paid for by local taxpayers. What's happened with the revisions in tax law is that now we have actually two separate pieces. We have for Tier 1, which is the first $300 of operating levy, we've gone from 5% to 45% of that first $300 is paid for by the state. And then for the next amount up to $760, there's an additional 6% of the levy, operating levies, that are paid for by the state. So what does this mean? Well, what this means is that when we take a look at the operating levies that we currently have in place, the taxpayer savings in Pay 14 amount to $163 a pupil, or $660,593. So it's a very powerful statement in terms of the fact that we were able to finally get the legislature's attention in terms of the fact that that was problematic. And our hope is to continue to talk about that, because there still is significant disparity between districts based on the amount of valuation of property within the district. And the other place that we'll be working over this next couple of years to work on is the next place where there's a real disparity, and that's in debt service, where again there used to be a point in time when in debt service a significant portion of the debt service for low valuation districts like Northfield was covered by the state, so that there was some balance. Over the years that has disappeared, so almost no district in the state gets any equalization for their debt service funding. So that'll be the other place that we're going to try to work going forward. But I guess I just want you to know that's why we belong to see all these years. It's what's important about what's there. And although the wins sometimes are several years between, this is a significant positive impact for our district and every other low valuation district in the state. So Faribault's impacted it very much the same way. Lots of the districts around us are impacted in very much the same way, who are districts that tend to be lower property wealth, with less commercial and industrial property and less taxable property, so that the effort has been mainly absorbed by every homeowner that you have within the community. So just want you to be aware that that piece is out there. That's a really good story to be able to talk to people about.
Great. That's terrific. And then the end of year enrollment report.
And then again, as we've done every month, you can see basically where we stand in terms of enrollment. And actually the interesting thing right now is that our enrollment for this month, end of the year, was the highest it was all year, at 3,920 students. So it's an interesting piece. I don't think I'm ready to void Hazel's prognostications yet, but the good thing is typically what you see is a drop in enrollment over the course of the year, especially when there is some drop because of dropouts or people leaving the system or whatever. But our numbers have really stayed, again, as they tend to stay, very, very flat across time, which means we tend to be able to maximize the per pupil funding that we get because it doesn't change much. Okay.
All right. Future meetings, we have 2 in August, and we'll be hearing from Danita as to a potential work session, hopefully.
This is your next from Rob and Carrie.
Great, great. All right, with that, I would ask for a motion for adjournment.
Move adjourned.
Moved by Noel.
Second.
Seconded by John. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.
Perfect.